Yeah.
This is muted.
Good evening and welcome to the Town of Millis MBTA 3A Advisory Committee meeting. This is November 21st and I'm Jody Garzon, the chair. We have our committee members here tonight and we have MAPC with us to walk us through our various decisions that we are going to be making. Do we have any announcements or updates? Okay. So I think while the agenda doesn't say, it looks like we'll hand it over to John to start going through the slides.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody for being here, members of the committee, members of the public, anyone who's watching from wherever you are. Can everyone hear me, Bob? Are we all good to go?
I think we were.
Can we get the audio through the TV at all? Because it's coming off your computer, not off the TV.
Yeah.
I think you just need to spotlight me, and when I do my screen share, it should go full screen. So I'm going to try that right
Well,
now.
it's the audio, so.
Yeah, what we'd like to do is increase the audio here, John.
So,
So
Can
hang
you-
on a second.
you're yeah.
And maybe, guys, in the,
Just take the remote and increase the volume on the TV.
But
Yeah,
turn
but-
down your,
but
turn
turn
down
down
your
your
computer
computer,
first.
though.
okay, so I got to turn down my computer.
Mute your computer, yeah, not mute, but yeah, mute the speakers.
Okay, let me do this.
Yeah.
All right, okay,
The cavalry's here.
yeah.
We need to raise the volume for the TV.
And we're gonna need somebody in the TV to talk to see if we've achieved that. That's not promising.
There we go. You want to give it a try, John? Yeah?
We got nothing now.
So I have to turn mine up?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I think I heard it, but I'm getting an echo.
John, do you wanna try speaking again?
Talk, 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 testing, testing, talk, 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 testing, testing, talk.
Still coming from my computer.
So can we select the speaker, or does that have a speaker on it?
The TV has a speaker, we get it through the TV all the
This is what
time.
we've done before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Try it again, John.
Talk, 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 testing,
Okay,
testing,
that'll
talk,
just
talk.
have to
better.
work. The TV does work, though. We've had it on our meetings,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, so you can maximize that Zoom screen there.
All right.
There you go. All right. You're good to go, John.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you to everybody who's here in attendance tonight. I'm really excited to have this conversation with everyone. And in light of any kinds of concerns that may be around audio video difficulties, if there's anything that I need to repeat or step back from, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to do so. And I'm keeping this microphone as close to my face as possible, so I promise I'm not trying to hide from anyone tonight. Okay, getting right into it. We're very excited to be here with this meeting tonight, November 20th, 2023, and this is officially meeting number 7 for this committee. And what we're going to do is talk about why we're here. We're going to go over the results of the online open house. I know a lot of folks have had some time to kind of sit and think about this already before we come to this meeting, but we want to go over them together, have a chance to have a dialogue if there's a need to do so, and of course be able to share these results with members of the public. We're going to hopefully, we really need to decide on the final boundaries for these zoning options and then take the next steps. If there's other administrative items that need to be added in at the end, anything related to minute approval or public comments or anything like that, I'm going to go ahead and leave that up to you all as the governing body to make that work. This is really my agenda for the things that we need to accomplish on our end for this evening. So, goals for tonight. We're going to discuss the results of the online open house, have a dialogue if we need to, decide on the final boundaries and regulations for the 3A districts, and have a decision on, hopefully on the mixed-use regulations for the 3A districts. And even if this is something where we can just kind of get a direction, more so than something definitive that we need to wrap up later on, that's okay. Really, the boundaries and regulations are the most important part, because we're going to be drafting the zoning bylaw really, really soon here, and we need to have all that squared away so that we can do so. The online open house, we had a little shy of 400 responses, and the numbers varied by question. We didn't have anything be required for people to fill out, so some people skipped questions if they wanted to do so. The first two zoning scenarios received the most support, followed by the first one, followed by scenario 2 and 3 in that order. There's a strong preference for limiting the building height, a strong preference for mixed use. There was a lot of priority comments given to green space and outdoor recreation. And one of the things that we heard that was fairly consistent throughout is that the public wants to see a lot more details on the things that are happening. And I think that's apparent not just in the conversations that you all have been hearing, but in the feedback that Bob is getting. And I think it's illustrated by the fact that we have an in-person audience tonight as well. We asked a question about what 3A should be doing. And towards the top of these responses, we had conversations about outdoor recreation, public green space to relax and play, a place for people to walk and go shopping, be able to gather with family and friends, and then lower on we see smaller homes, starter homes, different homes, things like that. And this is a question where people could choose more than one answer, so the percentages aren't going to add up to 100. You're going to see a lot of that in these results, so if the numbers look screwy, that's probably why. If you still think it looks screwy, stop me and ask, and we'll talk about it. We had a question specifically about the Ann and Hope site, which is something I know the committee was really anxious to kind of have an opinion on from the public. The most responses were that people want to see a mixed-use building with a commercial on the ground floor, and it's cut off on here, but it would be residential on stories above number 1. So we also saw a commercial shopping center with housing, recreational facilities, green space, shopping center, and then under that it drops off to lower than 25% for things like offices, just housing, grocery, and current use and things like that. We had a very strong building height preference of 3 stories. You can see it's not even close between 3, 4, and 5. People really came out and told us that they want to keep the scale as small as possible here. And when we look at where density could go and how things could look, people said they wanted smaller buildings that are more spread throughout the town instead of larger buildings concentrated in the town center. So again, a lot of support for lower density, a lot of support for things that kind of meet the existing town character more so than pushing it in a different direction, which I think is something that we all anticipated would be the response. We had a visual preference survey where we gave folks a lot of different photos and said which ones of these do you like and which ones do you not like. And again, this is a situation where the percentages aren't going to add up to 100%. People could select as many as they liked. And the top choice is this one in the upper left-hand corner where we have this small-scale mixed use, commercial on the ground floor, residential on the second story, and the 2.5 stories here as well. The next most popular is a 2-story mixed use, followed by a 3-story mixed use, and then similar sorts of buildings on the bottom here not receiving as much support. I think a lot of that has to do more so with aesthetics than anything else, and people felt like the buildings on the top would be a better fit for Millis visually and aesthetically. We asked a question about if you're going to be supporting affordable housing in 3A districts, and this had very, very strong support. We had 80% of respondents say that they really felt that affordability is something they'd be extremely supportive of, very supportive of, or supportive of in some way. We had another question about if we should be focusing affordability on more units that don't have as deep affordability or fewer units that are more affordable. People were split on this, and I don't think we could really get a direction one way or another, so that's going to be something that we're going to have to talk about. A couple points of note on zoning as we look through these scenarios that we presented to folks. We asked people to evaluate each zoning scenario independently of the others, and a lot of people who selected unsure gave us comments that said, well, I want to see all of them and then pick which one. And the idea was that we'd ask people to decide on them on their own merits one at a time, as opposed to directly comparing them, because it's still a work in progress. We're going to finalize things tonight. It's probably going to be a little bit different than what was presented in the survey. So we're not saying pick one of these three. We're saying what do you like about these three? How and why do you like it? There were also 23 participants who were not in favor of any zoning scenario and would vote against 3A at town meeting. This is about 14% of all polling results on zoning scenarios. And as you go through the results, you'll see for them, there's a block of people who are just voting no on everything, which is to be expected a little bit. This isn't something that everyone's going to like. So keep that in mind when we're looking at these results, is that there seems to be a group of folks who are expressing that they don't want to see any changes happening here. First was zoning scenario 1. This was the simplest of all the 3 zoning scenarios. It treats all 3 districts equally, keeping them at about 15 units per acre. And when we asked them if this is something that you generally support, we had about half of the people say that they would support or strongly support it. 26% of people said that they're not really sure, and then those 23% are those same folks again saying that they would not support it. We asked them a little bit more directly if they would vote for this at town meeting based on the information that they have now. I understand that's a little challenging to do, but we saw more than half of the people saying that they would vote for it. Some folks that were unsure, under 10%, and about a third of people would vote against it. So a little bit more concrete as far as how this looks. When we go on to zoning scenario number 2, this was one where we kept the boundaries the same, and instead we said we're going to lower the density in District 1, which is the pink area over here, and to compensate for lowering that density, we would raise the density in Districts 2 and 3 in the blue and the orange. So as a result of this, we saw support drop a little bit, but we still have a lot of folks that are unsure, between a quarter and a third of people not sure if it's something that they would support or not. And based on that, it really seems as though we have a lot of room to potentially work with this here. We do see, for the town meeting question, the vote for drops below 50%, but it's statistically very close when we look at these numbers and say, well, is it for, is it against, is it unsure? I think this really tells us that this is something that could potentially work. We just need to have a conversation about it, refine it, and make sure that we're addressing concerns that people shared with us. Scenario 3, we change the boundaries a little bit, and what we do is separate the Ann and Hope and GAF site from the rest of District 2 and make them a new District 3. And this tiers the density a little bit more, keeping a low density of up to 10 units an acre in District 1, around 15 units an acre in District 3, and around 20 units an acre in District 2, and around 20 units an acre in District 3. This one is a little bit more complicated because the regulations wouldn't be the same throughout all 3 districts, and it's also one that we saw didn't have as much support. So the general support drops down to 40%. Still a big chunk of people unsure at 25%, roughly a quarter of the people that responded, and then roughly a third of the people said they would not support it. When we asked directly about whether they vote for it at town meeting, the number of people who were unsure drops drastically down to 5%, and most of those people that were unsure said that they would vote against it. That 40 number for strong support only turns into 42 for vote for, and the 34% for do not support turns into 54% for vote against. So I think this really jives with what a lot of the other questions asked about if we would like to see more space dedicated to 3A versus less space and higher density. I think that's really reflected here. That being said, I think that we're close to getting to at least 50%, if not more, on all of these once we're able to address people's concerns and give them some more details on it. This breaks it down a little bit more so we can see how they compared. We can see these are these same 23 people over here on the right in the strongly dislike category. And you see the green number dwindles a little bit, the yellow numbers dwindle a little bit, and the dislike numbers go up as we move down the scenario list. Very similar situation on the question for town meeting support, 1, 2, and 3. These are worded a little bit differently. Instead of the 5 levels of support, we have just 3 for what support currently is presented. Support if some changes were made, and then would not support. And with all of these, I think that we could get there. And some of the changes that people wanted to see made, we're going to get into that right now. And we asked people to give us some other comments, give some thoughts as to what they would really like to see. And we try to take those and break them down into categories so that they'd be easy to kind of look at. And when we say restrict development, there were some comments that said, you know, there were concerns over building height and trying to limit the number of apartments for lower than what the zoning mandate calls for. Some people had boundary critiques, feeling that we should tweak the boundaries a little bit, or they say, I want my house in, or I don't want my house in, or whatever it might be. Support for mixed use indicates that residents would be willing or more than willing to support a zoning scenario if there was mandatory mixed use, especially on the Ann and Hope site. And a lot of the unsure comments were just people saying that I'm not really ready to make a decision right now. I need a lot more information. And if we can get there, then we can have that conversation. So I think that's to be expected a little bit. The other comments were really all over the place. Sometimes it was talking about walkability and environmental concerns. Some people were talking about making sure zoning districts don't encroach onto Parker school land, which of course they're not going to. That's all restricted. And a hodgepodge of other things that seem to be a little bit of one-offs. So that's where a lot of the comments came from, is just people like mixed use. They want to see a sense of community, not just housing. They want to see open space preserved. They want to make sure that there's a really traditional look to this, and that we're not just going ahead and building large apartment buildings that don't match the aesthetics of the town and don't match the town character. And really any scenario will get more support if there's required mixed use as a result of it. That seems to be some of the key themes that we've heard throughout all of this. So before we go into finalize the zoning, I want to pause for a minute, turn things back over to the committee, hear any thoughts, reflections, maybe some other takeaways that you got from looking at this data that we didn't get, and of course open up the floor for any questions for me.
Any questions?
I have one.
Go ahead.
Is mandatory mixed use allowable? We've been back and forth on that, and I don't remember where it ended.
Yes, mandatory mixed use is allowable with the caveat that anywhere where there's mandatory mixed use, we won't get the full unit capacity out of those areas. So for instance, we could say for the Ann and Hope site, yes, we can mandate mixed use here. If we do that, we won't get full credit for the number of units we could potentially build otherwise. I think it's a cap of something like 20%. That being said, I don't think that we're going to be in any danger of not hitting our unit capacity numbers as a result of that happening. So when we get into the recommendations, we'll have our recommendation for where we think mandatory mixed use makes sense, and it's certainly something that we can do.
Okay. Because we've been back and forth on that a few times. And I know Ann and Hope in my mind was out unless it was mixed use. But if we can set that as mandatory mixed use, I'm open to listening to it a little bit more.
Question?
Go ahead.
How many
Speaking to the microphone.
how many individual homes are in each one of these districts?
That is something that I don't know. That's not something that we've done any analysis on at this point. We could take a look and see how many residential parcels are and things like that, but that's not something that we've taken a look at just yet.
I don't think individual homes is the question. The question is, we're going to displace probably 50% of the town of Millis, because they generally live in the RV Village district. So how many homes are we impacting? How many families are going to be displaced by this in the long term?
I don't think we're in a position to displace anybody. What we're doing here is saying that people that own property in these 3A districts will have an additional set of regulations that they can use if they so choose. So they will have the ability to build something different on their property if they want to, but there's no mandate to do so. We're not going to be suggesting that anybody who owns property redevelop their home or anything else.
The question
but when I say
remains, how many
redevelop-
people, how many individual homes are we impacting? And I think
I
that's
do not
an
have-
answer
I do
we
not
need
have
to
that number at
have,
this
and I'll
time.
certainly bring it up at town meeting.
That's certainly something that Bob and I can put our heads together on and come up with a number for.
Other
Yeah, we could
questions?
do that.
Yeah,
My
go ahead.
question, John, is if there's any more like written feedback, I guess specifically on more scenario 2 and 3 in the do not support. I guess I'm just curious because the zone 1, the pink zone that like runs, looks like down towards Village Street and kind of in that area. If you're right, like all that area, like I would surprise that seems like where you would want lower density, which the scenarios do. So I'm curious, like, I guess I'm just curious about like if there's any more like insight into why these two scenarios aren't supported or people are unsure about them.
I think the biggest thing here with the high unsure numbers is that we just didn't give a whole lot of information because we don't have the information available yet. And I think this is one of those things where when folks are preparing themselves for town meeting, they get the warrant, they have lots of information to read through, there's lots of stuff to look at and have conversations about. And at this stage, things are a lot more conceptual. So I think the feedback that we got from a lot of people was illustrating, like, you're asking me if I would vote on something and I don't know all the details about what I'd be voting on yet. And that's where people are a little bit more unsure. I agree that I think that a lot of people would potentially be in a position of saying, you know, the area in the pink may be less suited for higher density than the orange and the blue areas. But I think at the end of the day, what people are really telling us is that they don't want to see density any higher than it would need to be to comply in any of these areas. So that's where I think, in addition to the fact that the first zoning scenario is much simpler, it treats everything the same way. There's not a whole lot of variation or a lot of complications to understand, and the more we move through these, the more complicated they get. So I think that there's a lot more education that needs to be had around whatever direction the committee decides to take. I think that for all the people that said they're in this number 23, people that are the strongly dislike, I think those are people who are not going to vote for this at town meeting regardless. I think they strongly dislike 3A. They dislike all the things that are going on. The comments that we received from those people were not constructive. And they're not things that I'm interested in repeating tonight because it's not going to further our conversation any. And I think that no matter what, there's always going to be people that are just not interested in doing anything different or allowing multifamily buildings. So that's where I see it. I'm not sure if that completely answers your question, if there's anything else I can elaborate on.
It does, but can I follow up with 2 other quick questions?
Yeah, please do.
Have we done calculations that with the mixed use, mandatory mixed use specifically, I guess on the GAF and Ann and Hope sites, and the desire to be 3 stories or less, do we still hit all of the unit minimums that we need to be able to zone for?
Yes and no. Yes, in the fact that we know that the way the unit counts on everything else goes, if we were to remove those sites from the equation entirely, we would still hit our unit capacity. So whatever we're able to get out of those units will be okay. We haven't been able to run that mixed-use compliance model yet because we're still waiting on that model to be done from EOHLC. And once they give that to us, then we can do that. But we feel confident having this conversation tonight because we don't necessarily need the full unit capacity for those to be able to make it work.
And then my last question, then I'm done. is I'm assuming that MAPC is working with other towns and communities on helping them through this zoning. Is like I'm curious if like these numbers of support and unsure and do not support are like kind of what you're seeing across the board in other towns.
That is a great question. To answer the first part, we are doing this work in a lot of other communities. I don't even have the full exhaustive list of that in front of me because we're involving a lot more departments than we usually do. I also know that the communities that are moving quicker to adoption, the ones that have their deadline of December 31st of this year, the rapid transit communities, the ones that are served by the blue, red, green, and orange lines in the Boston Metro, most of those are cities and not towns, so we don't have the same kind of town meeting support questions from them. And I think as we start moving along to the municipalities that have the 2024 and 2025 compliance will have more of these numbers. I don't think we have numbers like this anywhere for people that have town meeting votes just yet. I will look into it and find out for sure, but I don't know if we're there just yet. We might be in Acton. I'll talk to the project manager for Acton and see what that looks like.
Other questions? I don't hear any.
Anything further?
I don't hear any.
Question, yeah, I got a question.
Can you come up to the mic, please?
Sure, I'll come up to the mic.
Please state your name and your address for us.
Yes, my name's John Hughes. I live on 44 McCabe Ave. And, I saw the survey, it was 300 and something people. Is that correct on the survey? That answered the survey? I lived on McCabe Ave. I didn't get a letter or any information, and something that would directly impact my street. I'm wondering why that is. I mean, I think it'd be courtesy just to send a letter to the houses and say, maybe there'd be more people answer the survey if they actually knew it was going to impact them in some way. And going forward, what would be done to alert us to things like this here that would affect us directly? That would be my question.
Yeah. Well, everybody, what we did to publicize it was we put it on the town website, on the front, at the very top of the town website. It went out on social media. We didn't send hard letters out because, frankly, we're not budgeted to do something like that. But we did manage to get, the town website, town's Facebook, and then, of course, it goes on to the local Facebooks, is usually very effective at getting out to a lot of people.
It doesn't sound like it with 300 and some odd respondents to the survey. Probably, 8,500 people in Millis or so. And then, I really think that streets that would be impacted should be contacted. You don't have to send the whole town, but maybe right where the major impact is. I think that would be important to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on?
Madam Chair, I'd support that. More notification. This is impacting most people's entire living, their total wealth.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I think one of the things that we have to clarify here is that the bylaw that we are looking to write, which I will admit I have some issues with, is not a mandate on the town or on any individual property holder. So whatever the zone that your property currently has, however you are currently zoned, that zoning will not change. What we did decide early on was that when this bylaw is written, it is going to be written as an overlay. which we have a couple of overlays in town currently. And what an overlay is we will take whatever the bylaw is, whatever towns it's going to be, it literally sits, as far as the zoning laws are concerned, it's an additional zoning option. It will not change the current zone for any home in the town. It will simply provide an additional option. We have the same situation on this, along 109. We have a multi-use overlay. So if you're a commercial property, such as, well, Mr. Kazis is a perfect example. His property was commercially zoned, but because he is in the overlay, he had the option to either just build it commercially, or he could do mixed use, which was commercial on the bottom, office space and/or residence on the second or third floor. He did not lose his commercial zoning and only have mixed use. He actually had the option for both. And we have that overlay along 109. So this would be, it will work the same way. Nobody's zoning is going to change. That's the one of the two important things to remember. The second important thing to remember is that while the zoning is mandated by the state that we do this or we suffer financial loss, extensive financial loss from the state, the building itself, the construction of these homes is not mandated. So if my house is zoned, has this overlay, it doesn't mean I have to do anything. I don't have to now change my house from a single-family house to a multifamily development. It does mean that I could do that or possibly impact it if my next door neighbor decides to sell her home and build multifamily. So it's not, no one will be forced to be displaced from their home. No one's home is going to be forced to build this. The state cannot require that we build these units. We only have to zone for it. Now, one of the reasons that we are in such this is an ongoing process, is because usually when we're going to add a new zoning bylaw, the planning board does this. I mean, I'll be honest, I've written multiple zoning laws for this town, and I can do it in a month and get it in front of the planning board. But we want to fill in, we want to make sure this fits all of the requirements of the state so that we don't lose this state funding, but that we have minimal impact so that if my neighbor does sell her property in or if she just decides, I'm going to rip my house down and I've got, half an acre of land, I'm going to put 8 units. We want to make sure that the abutters have as minimal impact as possible. But no one is going to be forced to act upon this overlay district. If we never build if there is never a single development under this zoning bylaw, state can't do anything to us.
We're still in compliance.
We just have to write the bylaw and get it passed to be in compliance with the state law.
Ladies first.
I totally understand and
Please
respect.
state your name and your
Yes, I'm
address.
sorry. Kathy Smith, 28 McCabe Avenue. I totally understand what you're saying, but what, I guess our problem, or I'll only speak for myself, but the neighborhood is on 8/20/2023. McCabe Avenue was not in that map. We were not there. 8/21, you had a meeting which no public comment was allowed. You canceled the meeting in October. We're just finding out our road is part of it. Why would you choose the smallest lots in the town of Millis? Because what you're saying is going to happen. Our neighbor's going to sell. They're going to build 6 units. We all have bungalows. I mean, we have bungalows or little tiny houses. I don't understand why you're adding just our street to this. I need an answer, I guess. Because on 8/20, I reviewed everything. We were not in there.
I have not
Yeah.
been at such granular level. 'Cause
Well, we
obviously
have, because
those
it
who-
impacts, it doesn't impact
Exactly.
any of you, it impacts us.
Right, understood,
Yeah.
understood, yep.
And the October meeting was just a review of this that we had to postpone because we didn't have a quorum. So we would
True,
have
but
seen the
what I'm
same
saying,
thing,
we
yeah.
didn't have a chance to speak until right now, and I know one of the comments is going to be, you should have come earlier, but we didn't have a chance to speak. And we just found out that we were on there. We were not on there on 8/2.
Right.
On August 2nd, the presentation that the MAPC did, we were not on there. I guess I want to know why are we miraculously on there now? That one of the streets that have just about the smallest lots in the town of Millis.
Is that on all 3 districts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't recall it being there either, and that was a surprise to see it. I guess this goes back to a little of the concern I expressed earlier. I'm not sure we as a committee are driving this as much as as it's being driven by the advisory committee, the representatives. If McCabe had been on there, we would have said something. All of us would have said something. We've been vocal that Ann and Hope shouldn't be on there unless it can be multi-use. And it was presented as an option to be, I mean, I was advocating not putting Ann and Hope on at all because I wanted to just extend the overlay district. So I really expressing concern to the MBTA, to the committee out there, that the professionals working on this, I'm not sure they're listening to the community as much as they should. I firmly support this project. I like everything about it. But when you slip in McCabe, when you include Ann and Hope, as a possible not multi-use, when Nicole and I have been pretty much from day one saying not to do that, I question who's driving this, and I don't feel that I am.
And we're not opposed to
No, I
afford
understand. Yeah.
housing.
Yeah.
We're not, none of us.
I mean, we
speak for
discussed
my-
extending down
I should
Lavender
just speak
because
for
it made
myself.
sense at a public
Right.
meeting. We discussed
Yeah.
extending down Lavender because Lavender ties to, well, a couple pizza places and a few other restaurants.
Yep.
But let's be honest, that's what we have. But I don't recall McCabe ending up on this, and I don't know if that was added in a subsequent
Can we ask?
conversation. Yeah.
Can we ask how that got added? Because I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't realize McCabe had been added at all.
Neither did we. I can sit,
Yeah.
and you can come up. You have to state your name.
Thank you.
Well, can we get an answer to that, how
Yeah.
it was added? Because that would be helpful.
John, can you shed some light on that for us?
I can shed some light on that. I think this is just something that came up in other conversations as we were talking about what is also abutting the MCEOD that's next to the other areas that were included, and that's where these properties on McCabe Avenue came up and why they became part of this conversation. I would encourage members of the committee and members of the public to maybe refrain from some of these thoughts until after we go through what MAPC's recommendations are, because I don't think that we're going to be recommending keeping the McCabe properties in here moving forward.
I can't just state that McCabe Avenue is not part of MEOCD. But behind it is, but McCabe Avenue is not.
Correct, that's what I
Yep,
said,
yep.
abuts the MCEOD.
Right, but McCabe Avenue is not part of it. And right now, your plan has McCabe Avenue in it.
Right now, we have some conceptual thoughts that we ask the public to give us their thoughts on. That's
Sure.
all it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
And I
thank you.
think part of the problem is too, it takes a 2/3 majority to pass this. It's not just a simple majority. So we got to be very careful what we put out. And this,
Yeah.
I don't know that they're aware of it because they're dealing with towns and cities that may not require a 2/3 majority.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so our bylaw requires a 2/3 majority,
Yeah,
so.
I think that's something to be cognizant of.
Just point of information in support of the speaker right now, is the town surveyor for over 40 years here. Most of the lots that are shown on, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, are all subzoned. There's a few that meet the zoning, but the vast majority, and I've been on the zoning board, everybody's before us saying pre-existing non-conforming,
Yeah.
pre-existing non-conforming. All of the lots are small, not just McCabe Avenue, but almost every lot that you've shown
Yeah.
is subzoned.
Right.
Just
Yeah, That's the nature of kind of that.
And
that
part of the
area.
idea behind it was to encourage the combining of several lots to make a buildable lot. I'm interested to hear what they come out with when they do this, not looking at a quarter-acre lot, putting up something,
And that was something that we had discussed early on,
Yeah.
was limiting the lot size, having a minimum lot
Right.
size, because that was my question, that as your concern, Kathy, was my question, one of the first meetings that we had, was that the vast majority of these areas are quarter-acre lots or smaller. And so are we going to say, okay, in an area, in any of these areas, if you've got, even a less than a quarter-acre lot, if you get a quarter-acre lot or less, can you put end up putting 3 units if that's what the percentage works out? And now you've got, the abutters are all, nobody's getting any sun because you're going to have a larger building that's shadow, and that's going to change the whole dynamic of that neighborhood. And so that is one of the concerns that we've had all along, and trying to figure out how can we make this work so that neighbors aren't going to be negatively impacted, and then their home values, because nobody wants a 1.5-story home that's got a 3-story home next to them and they're being shadowed.
Right. Yep.
Could we also consider putting in the bylaw that minimum of 5 acres and no appeal to that? So they can't go to the zoning board of appeals and say, look, I got 4.9 acres. Can you make an exception?
Well,
That is not something that we can do. If we require a lot size of 5 acres, then any lot that is not currently at least 5 acres will not count towards compliance. So that's not something that we'd be able to do.
And we don't have enough 5-acre plus
Yeah.
lots.
To use this area, you have to use a 10,000 square foot lot size, it sounds like, that they're proposing. But we can get more into that as we get to the information.
You have a question?
Yes, Steve Smith, 28 McCabe Ave. I guess getting back to your point, though, if you're saying this is an overlay district, and I've been involved with real estate for a very long time, and you're saying it goes back to current zoning, whatever you're zoned now, with the exception of maybe a couple of parcels, I'll speak for McCabe Ave, we're all non-conforming lots anyways. So right off the bat, then, you're saying the only way, in my thinking, that you're thinking, the only way that any of it can be developed is to have an assemblage of 2 or 3 parcels, rip everything down, and then build it? Because if you have a non-conforming lot, right off the bat, then it doesn't meet anything. If you say it has to be based, any new construction would have to be based on current zoning, right?
Well, the nonconformity would have to do, and you would.
Say there's no lot size.
Answer
My
this
lot
question.
right now is 7,500 square feet.
So, but the nonconformity for that is of its current use.
Exactly.
But that's nonconforming for your current zone. It may not be nonconforming, it depends on whether it would be nonconforming for this new overlay.
But you said the overlay goes back to the current zoning as far as dimensional requirements, setbacks.
No, what I said is you will retain your current zoning, the overlay.
So
The setbacks
I got you.
may end up being different for the overlay than we're going to have to look into all of that. We haven't reached that.
That's what I say. So even in the overlay district, you haven't figured out what setbacks are going to be or what minimum
haven't
lot
got that
size.
far.
Part of the meeting.
We
or
haven't gotten
anything
that
like
far
that.
in the
Well, I mean,
decision.
it's if you guys didn't even realize McCabe Ave was in there to begin with, then I guess I'll wait a little bit before other comments.
I think I may be able to add to that. I think I know what you're saying. So if you have 10 lots, and each one of them is undersized, pre-existing non-conforming, if you come in with the new bylaw, which requires 5 acres, that means the developer, whoever he may be, A, B, or C, he buys all the lots. Then they come to a survey, he takes the whole thing and makes one lot out of it.
Oh, yeah. Which you
That's
can-
where you get the 5 lots. But
Oh, absolutely,
you'd have
but
to
scale it
purchase
down,
all.
forget the 5 acres, scale it down, say you guys decide it's a 10,000 square foot
Right.
lot. That means I could combine with my neighbor John, we could rip both houses down and put up what? And we're talking McCabe Ave, we're not,
Right.
we're talking about a lot of other issues going down in the area, but
Well, I think this raises a bigger question for me that I'm not sure our consultants are aware of. If these are 7,500 square foot lot sizes, and our minimum conforming lot size is 10,000 square foot in this item, can you count any of those? Can you count anything on McCabe Ave if they don't hit 10,000 square feet?
Wait a minute,
And
I thought
that-
you said 5 acres.
Madam Chair.
No, I'm just saying what's in the
A
proposed
lot of
bylaw
these
that they sent out.
questions are going to be answered, I think,
Okay.
later on. John,
I was just gonna
believe they're
say.
going to be later,
Yeah.
Okay.
answered
Yeah.
later on.
If you
But I
give
think that's
John,
a,
yeah,
yeah,
like
I
two
think that just
slides.
relates for how this is defined, because, yeah, they're proposing 10,000 square foot.
Right, but
which-
he'll get to, you'll see,
may not
his
count anybody.
MAPC's recommendation doesn't have McCabe in it. He hasn't got to it yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
What you've seen is conceptual designs, like John said, for people to look at and kind of vote on. Their recommendation is coming up, and
Yeah,
you
and-
guys are not on it.
Absolutely,
at all.
and just like on our end, it sort of was kind of just like, oh, by the way, you guys are here, and we went, oh, okay. Okay, fair enough.
All right, well, why don't we move on and let John continue with the slides here.
Thank you so much. We're going to move right along, and well, again, the big goal here is to kind of finalize what these districts are and what they should look like. So again, the three scenarios that we had side by side here, seeing just kind of how all of it looks. None of the boundaries are changing, just really questions around what sorts of density folks would like, and if they have any other comments, they could sort of let us know through the survey and things like that. So again, stuff that we've already kind of seen. Again, reminding everybody what we're here to do, finalize the zoning district size and regulations to draft the bylaw on where to locate mandatory mixed use. I have a note in here, something we've already talked about, that says that we need to really test the compliance to 100% be sure, and we can't do that until we have the information from EOHLC, which will come, who knows, any day now. We're all just waiting for it to happen, and figure out what to do with the Ann and Hope and GAF sites. So with all that in mind, we're going to talk about what we're recommending on the MAPC side, and what we have is 3 different recommendations. We don't have to take them exactly as they are. We can still adjust boundaries if we need to. We are presenting these based on stuff that our team has modeled with the modeling tools that we have available, the ones that aren't updated yet, to see what we could do to really hit the gross density numbers that we need to hit. And in order to do that, we had some conversations around adjustments and what do we put in and what do we keep out, and if we add other things, it does affect that calculation a little bit. And we wanted to keep the stories capped at 3. We really wanted to keep the number of units as low as possible to match the density of the town, and this is where we ended up. So we have a lot of different things. We want to make sure that it's going to be easy to message to the public. So all of these 3 proposed options have regulations that are just about the same in all 3 districts. The density is low at 15 or 17 units an acre. The mandatory mixed use isn't part of the calculations, but it will be soon. And all of this is driven by what we received during the community engagement process, the feedback that we heard from people. This is option 1. And what this does is it removes everything that is south of Main Street and adds all the stuff that was north of Main Street to District 2. And we have this little table on the right, and once I go through the 3 different options, we'll have a big table that shows where everything compares. The minimum lot size is the same throughout. The only things that are going to be a little bit different are the maximum number of dwelling units per acre, what we capped that at, and of course the total acres after excluded land, which is not going to be the same as the acreage of District 1 and District 2 that we see at the top. This is the total acres, actual, just seeing what the square acres are of these shapes that are blue and pink, and then after we remove excluded land from that, then that's what gets us to this number down here. So they don't completely add up, and that's why. So this is what we saw as a way of trying to get the density down to 15 dwelling units per acre. And because we have a lot of land, a lot of open space, a lot of other stuff south of Main Street, this recommendation says, you know what, if we take this out, this gets us there just with what we have, and we think that it's the lowest density option that we were able to come up with based on the draft boundaries, and also being able to get things to really where they need to otherwise, and to match all the other concerns that we've heard from folks in town. Minimum lot size is 10,000 square feet. That means any lot that's in here that's less than 10,000 square feet, which is about a quarter of an acre, it isn't included in the calculations for unit capacity or anything like that. But because it's part of the zone, they could do, as some people have alluded to today, and combine lots if that was going to be something they were interested in doing. 20% open space requirement, 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, front side and rear setbacks of 5 to 10 feet, building story height at 3, maximum lot coverage at 80%, that's the inverse of the open space number, an FAR of 2, and we're not capping the number of dwelling units per district here. Instead, we're just capping the number of dwelling units per acre at 15, and making sure that gets us to the gross density numbers that we need to get to. So that is option 1. Option 2 would be if we removed the GAF and Ann and Hope sites and kept everything south of Main Street in this configuration. I don't think it's a huge deal on our end getting rid of McCabe Avenue and the stuff on the west side here. Like I said, this is really things that abutted the MCEOD, and there was already stuff across the street. So from a conceptual standpoint, it made sense. The impact on residents is also something to consider. So we need to run some modeling again to make sure that we get there, but I think that we'll still be able to hit that 15-unit density if we cut all this out. This gives us a maximum dwelling unit per acre of 17 everywhere, so it's a little bit higher than 15. And when we see things like Ann and Hope and GAF removed from these recommendations, this is really thinking along the lines of, if you all were at a point where you said, you know what, I really want to do mixed use here, I want to do something different here, I want to do something more than what 3A would allow, and maybe it's best to have a separate conversation about this site or these sites, these are the approaches that play into that. So if we remove these and we want to get that dwelling unit per acre number down, we have to add some other stuff back in there to kind of get to that point. So Ann and Hope, GAF sites removed, all the land north of Main Street becomes part of District 2 because it's not contiguous anymore with District 3, so they have to become separated. And this is kind of what it looks like when it's all said and done. The third option is almost the same, but we bring back the GAF site, and same comments as before. If we want to remove McCabe Avenue or remove all the items on the west side of the street here, I don't think it's going to drastically impact things. We would have to rerun the models to make sure that that's going to be the case. But I think that we'd be in pretty okay shape to do that. And maybe it's something where dwelling units go from maximum of 17 to a maximum of 18 or something like that. But I don't think it's going to statistically significantly impact the way that our modeling is going to work moving forward. And again, all the other regulations, lot size, open space, things like that, those are all going to be the same throughout. Owen, you have your hand up? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I guess I have a quick question about the boundaries that I noticed when the whole McCabe Ave conversation came up. But like on this map that you're showing, like the Roach Brothers lot in Main Street over to Plain, and then I think it's like probably the Ace lot on across the street. Those are like outside of the zoning area, and I'm curious like why, like even though they're already commercial areas, is that why they can't be included in the current, in this rezoning? It seems like those would be like ripe areas where like you would potentially put housing right on, mixed use housing right on Main Street, and to not have them included in good acreage seems, I'm curious if what would happen there.
I think that any of it conceptually could be included. When we've had conversations about this before, it seems like there's been some back and forth on wanting to expand all the other options that we have available and also wanting to preserve the existing commercial that exists. And I think that we've heard a lot of strong comments about preserving the existing commercial base as it is. So In just a minute, in just a minute, we're going to have a conversation about where MAPC is recommending mandatory mixed use, and it'll show a zoning map there. And all of this stuff is structured to work around the existing commercial and the existing MCEOD.
Okay, and I know like we've had a lot of talk about the commercial districts as a committee. And if you put this, if I'm remembering correctly, I think this is what we had come to before, was that if you put this zoning over it, then you don't have to build commercial, and we're worried about losing that tax revenue, because you could, in theory, just build it as residential.
That is true, yes.
Okay, all right, I remember. Thank you. I just forgot about all that, but yes, makes sense.
So this is our use regulations table where, like I said before, we have our 3 different options and seeing how things all look side by side here. 10,000 square foot quarter acre lots, maximum coverage of 80% on the lot, setbacks of a minimum and max of 5 and 10 feet. I guess 5 to 10 feet. Those don't really alter the calculations a whole lot. So whatever we want that to be, I think will be okay. You can see the biggest things down here are just the maximum dwelling units per acre, and this is just a number that we put into the compliance model to cap it. And then once it looks at all the other factors, it gives us a difference between a gross and a net density. So using the areas that we put together for these zones, these are the numbers that we put in. We're getting them as low as possible to still achieve that gross density of 15 units per acre. With option 1, we can do that capping it at 15. With options 2 and 3, we'd have to move things up a little bit more. And if we want to amend the boundaries from what we have here, I can't give you a figure on site for that, but I'll say if we want to amend these districts and move forward with that, that's something that we can do. And if we have any problems with it, we'll come back to you guys and let you know. But we may need to bump this number up a little bit if we do so and modify any of these. So maybe 15 becomes 16, maybe 17 becomes 18, something like that. I think in the grand scheme of how development works and how people go ahead and build things, I don't think that's going to be a drastic change in what happens or what gets built or what the impact is going to be on neighbors. So I feel comfortable having that conversation. We've also had other conversations throughout all of this about having mixed use be optional in all of these districts, regardless of what the parcel is that we're talking about, but having mandatory mixed use being here. And we're suggesting that this covers the Ann and Hope site, the other parcels in CB2 over to the west, and the ones across the street as well, to kind of create a little bit more cohesion with the MCEOD and requiring mixed use in these areas moving forward. So if the committee wishes to keep the Ann and Hope site as part of 3A compliance, we heard a lot of feedback from the survey that said that people would really support mixed use here and that they may not be inclined to support this at town meeting if it didn't include mixed use. So I feel if we move forward with a scenario that keeps the Ann and Hope site in the 3A district, it should include mandatory mixed use, and this is what our team is recommending that looks like. So again, the questions for the committee: do we keep the boundaries or do we change them? Mandatory mixed use, yes, no, and where? And then I don't think that we have to necessarily reach an answer on this tonight, but if we have a conversation about what makes sense for affordability wise, we can have that conversation as well. Just to refresh everyone's memory, we can go up to 20% of all units in 3A districts have to be uppercase A affordable, and we can decide if that is more units, for instance, at 80% of the area median income, or fewer units that are more affordable for about 30-50% of the area median income. And what I would do is take that direction from you guys, give that to the person on our team who's doing all this affordability modeling, and I could say our goal is as many units as possible, or our goal is to try to get it as deeply affordable as possible. What can you give us that still complies and makes sense? So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and move this back over to option 1 and turn it back over to the committee for your thoughts.
Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Now that we know, and I say this totally just my own personal opinion, now that we know that mandatory mixed use is allowed, I can say that early on, I was against having this, an overlay in the MCEOD because I did not want to risk losing commercial space. But if we can put this zoning, the 3A zoning, and have a district that requires mixed use, I would be in favor of including all of the MCEOD district. Because if we've already designated that property as being able to do mixed use, why not have, if someone's going to put mixed use in there, why not have that applied there? My concern was solely that someone would take this commercial property and put in residence, we would lose that tax base. But if mixed use is allowable as a mandate, that changes my whole opinion on that area. I would like to see that, and that would reduce a lot of these residential areas.
Right.
Because between Ann and Hope, between the MCEOD, we would be able to reduce the residential burden that this is going to place on our residents.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with that entirely, now that we know that it is allowable, and that's the problem, this has been a moving target.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's a problem that was caused by the group, but it's just the problem, this changes by the state. But I would suggest, I like the inclusion of the Stony Brook area in it. I thought that was an area that made sense to consider for the higher density. I like the idea of the, MCEOD zoning included with overlay across all of it, which now expands our base considerably.
Yeah.
And I would go Ann and Hope and even GAF in with the mixed-use overlay, mixed-use requirement.
Well,
And
now-
I've just got one, go ahead.
No, that's my fault.
Yeah.
In bad form, I just interrupted you.
I'm known to do that too, and I'm very receptive when people do it to me.
As long as everyone's respectful.
Yeah. I just have a question. Why aren't we capping the number of units, though? Because looking at the numbers, 170 acres, call it 80% buildable, so drop it, roads, streets, sidewalks, other stuff. Call it 100 acres you could build on there, if I'm reading this right. That's a lot more than the required number of houses that we can have. So why aren't we capping the number of houses, or the units, rather, by district? That's a two-part question, I guess.
Madam Chair, the GAF, if we can only put housing there, don't forget, everybody that lives on that side of the tracks, you got no way of coming this way. So you need to have multi-use
Right.
at GAF.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
There's no question, because, I live over there, and I'm not walking across the railroad to go to Ann and Hope. I'm just not gonna do it. And neither are the people that are gonna live there.
Right.
So I think you've gotta have, at least in the large parcels, anything over 10 acres, have it on that district. One other point I'd like to make is, and this is a question for these folks here, is it 2 parking spaces per unit? Is that across all venues,
All districts?
all districts?
I think it was.
I believe
Yes,
so.
I think it
Yeah,
was.
I think we need to change that to a minimum of 3.
Oh.
2 doesn't work. That means husband and wife have a car, but the relatives can't visit. If you have a 3-bedroom house and you got 2 kids with cars, you got 4 cars, you got 2 parking spaces. And that's going to impact the rest of the neighbors, because everybody's going to park out in the street. We saw that, an example was right down here on Spring Street, on the development that just went in there, and they have, I think, two spaces per. Well, nobody can visit. It's an impossibility. It's like putting up a commercial building and not, being down in Martha's Vineyard and trying to find a space at the beach because they only have 2 parking spaces. You got to have at least 3, and if you're going to have more than 10 units, I'd say you got to go to 4 parking spaces per project.
I think John can answer it, but I know you brought this up before, and we couldn't control parking spaces.
Well, so
There's
you can
certain
have
limits.
minimal, when you have minimum parking spaces, it's minimum parking.
Yeah.
So if you're developing, if you're putting a larger facility. I would just, in the builders that I've worked with, either privately or seen in the planning board, when you have a larger development, you have guest parking. It doesn't mean they can only do 2, and that's going to come into play with the developer. If you have a development like that, I mean, that's
Yeah. I
kind
mean,
of the
an
developer's.
example of that is the.
If you have a requirement of a minimum of 3 or 4 parking spaces, you're not going to have enough land to build these units and have parking. I don't think it's physically feasible to be able to do
But
that.
in that case, you've got to
Without
allow.
having the
you've got to have
units go
street
higher.
parking then. You have no choice. You got to have street park. For instance, down at Herman Shoe, I believe the parking density there is 1.5 for each unit. So if you got 3 cars, you can only have 1 person with a car. Everybody else has to park out in the street. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
I believe the state requirements address some of that parking issue. Of course, with mixed use, that would be a different paradigm.
Yeah.
Right.
But almost all the 40Bs, you know, the ones being built across from Herman Shoe, not Herman Shoe, but down where Judge St. Cyr used to live, down in Thrashers Hill, I believe that's 1.5. I don't know where the people are going to park, but maybe they're going to park on Main Street. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all.
Can we go back?
And that is an important point of conversation here, because any part of the district that we have that is mixed use under 3A, we can't have those parking requirements for them. We can't require parking minimums in mixed use districts under 3A. So that would be a reason not to touch the MCEOD as it currently exists.
Because I'd really like to get GAF into this one under mixed use, but the parking's a concern. Can we talk about the cap again that I brought up? Why aren't we capping the units? Because if we got, 172 acres and call it 100 that you can build on at 15, 17 units, that's a lot of units over what we're required to build.
If we want to cap them, we can cap them.
Okay,
We can have
that was the question. I
conversation
didn't know
as
if there was a
everyone's-
reason we didn't cap it. Yeah.
Right, be closer to 7 rather than 18, trying to get to 7.
I think the most important thing is deciding on the boundaries, and
Yeah.
then if we want to cap them based on the boundaries, that can give us more of a definitive number as far as what these unit build-outs would look like. And until we get to that point, it's a little challenging to definitively say that and put that into the modeling.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure it was an option, because I don't mind getting to the 750 fully built-out units. I don't want to get to 1,700 fully built-out units, you know?
Yeah. All right, other comments?
So I'm just wondering if John is able to take option 1 and include the things that you've asked for, Craig.
Well,
and
no-
then also include GAF in the mixed-use area.
Yeah, the thing that I'm concerned about that he just said was we can't mandate parking for mixed use. So that becomes a little bit of an issue, I would imagine, you know? But I guess, option 1, including Stony Brook, with the ability to then take away from some of the demand on the pink area, potentially, by replacing it with Stony Brook, and then the discussion is include GAF and Ann and Hope as overlay, as mixed use. I don't know what that looks like without having adequate parking.
So
I
more
don't
like
know if
option
it's-
Excuse me,
3?
John, do you know what
More
we're
along the
talking
lines of
about when we
option
say
3.
Stony Brook?
Yeah, we're talking.
If you look at option 3, it's pretty much what you got
I
there.
guess there's 4 parcels
Yeah.
that are kind of part of that, right? 1, 2, 3, 4.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you go to option 3, it's pretty close to that is what we're describing.
I think if you,
Yeah, but same,
Yeah.
it still fits into the same overlay. You can overlay it.
I think
Yeah.
if you have a mixed use, if you're going to build a mixed-use development, you're not going to rent those commercial units.
Right.
If you don't have parking.
That's what I was deferring to you on.
So even though the mandatory parking
Yeah.
is not, we can't do that with this. Presumably, if I'm going to build a mixed-use development, and I'm not going to have adequate commercial parking, I'm never going to rent those units. So those are going to sit vacant, and Lord knows there is enough vacant commercial property in this state. So if you're going to build something like that, and having said that, we do, sitting on the planning board, we've had multiple times where people come in and they present us with a plan. I'm like, okay, the numbers on this, in the zoning bylaws say you need X, and you've come short of that. If they decide to go to the zoning board of appeals, generally that's not, people are developers are not so far off, right? When they come looking for a variance on
They
that.
could be cheap.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
everybody's, but you're not,
They're looking for the bottom line, and I think the bigger guys will. But I think what happens sometimes in developments like this, you get the three-piece suit guys coming out of Boston, they just want to put it down and dirty, sell it, and walk away. We didn't do anything. Not our fault.
Yeah.
If you don't have any parking, we don't care. And that seems to be what's happening with the 40B.
well, but with the 40B, you're not having the commercial, they're selling it and walking away.
Yeah.
There's two ends on that to consider. Goes back to what Craig and I were saying from day one. I don't want to lose commercial property.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is, I agree with you. If you put a commercial application in it, then that's going to be the driver. The apartments are just going to be, whatever happens, happens.
Right.
So maybe the commercial end of it will drive it.
I guess what.
But we got to leave enough room, and as the gentleman here said, cap it.
Yeah.
So we'll leave enough room that the commercial guy can come in and say, okay, we're going to add another 100, picking a number, another 100 spaces.
Right.
But if we don't cap it, it'll get built out.
Right.
And
Well,
we
when
don't
it
have
comes
that
to
option.
the GIF site, what I want is maximum flexibility so that something goes in there.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
Right, that makes that property
Right.
attractive to say, hey, the builder wants it and they'll sell it. John, can we distinguish on a mandated mixed-use property, can we at least distinguish that there be a separation between the residential parking and the commercial parking, and then only mandate the residential parking? Can we kind of get around it, at least do half of it?
I do believe the way that it's written says that you cannot have a commercial parking mandate, but there could still be mandates for residential. So allowing the people who live there a place to park is something that we should be able to do, but we can't require somebody to build additional parking spaces or a parking lot for the commercial.
So presumably,
So if we could bump the units to 3 or 4 each, there's your commercial parking too.
Shared parking is allowed
Yeah.
in town.
if we,
Because you can't separate it, it's a
Right.
instinctual
But you can share
separation.
it. Right.
But you can share.
John, could you go back to the graphic of the mandatory overlay?
The mixed
so
use
that could be the way
recommendation.
around it, is if
And, because
in
I'm
the
Yeah.
mixed
thinking,
use, if we
those
had
areas,
required
in terms of
3
parking,
units, like 3 parking spaces per
those
unit.
areas are, there's very large, first of all, it's in an area where there's already street parking, so there's parking available for commercial.
Oh, and there's a town lot too, on
There's a
the
town lot
EC.
over to the
EC.
left. Well, but
DL.
the town lot, actually, those parking spaces are all
Okay.
reserved for the tenants there. But those are large, GAF and Ann and Hope are both large. And it would be able to, a developer might be able to build with the parking in mind, the parking needs in mind for the commercial.
I don't think the town lot's reserved. I
It
don't.
has a
yeah.
few spots that are
There's
reserved
leases
for
on the town
tenants.
lots. For the commercial tenants, they have leases. But that might be part of the shared parking.
A couple, but
Yeah,
not,
there's maybe like half a dozen
Yeah.
spots
Not
that
that
have a
anybody's-
sign in front of them that say, parking for the salon, or, I think it's more that parking lot in
Yeah.
front.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
that part.
has, that
could
says, reserved for the tenants,
that could be.
but not in the back.
I didn't think so. Anyway, it's just
Yeah.
that, so extending into the MCEOD would be accommodated by the municipal parking lot in some area too, so, okay. I'm going back to liking expanding it.
Can I
So-
chime in a thought on parking?
Yeah, go ahead, Owen.
I think that we are looking at this very much from a perspective of we are established residents versus when you think about the whole purpose of this whole zoning thing is to ideally add housing, probably encourage housing for young families. It's connected to transit and getting people to have this housing and probably ideally commute into the city, right? So like the people who were building these housing for are coming at this from a totally different perspective. The mixed use, they're going to be the main supporters of the mixed use. Like there's, it just feels like we're focusing too much and worrying about parking compared to the opportunities that are there, and thinking more about who would be taking advantage of the opportunities for this housing and what those people want and the lifestyle that is going to be created around the housing that is there in combination with the mixed use.
Okay.
Right? It's not about us driving in from all of our places. Like it's also, we also have to think about the people who are coming into this area.
Rick and I can walk down.
Yeah. Well, so what we have before us is the mixed-use recommendation. We've discussed adding in some of these additional parcels in a mandatory mixed-use district. So we've talked about the MCEOD district, of adding that in, as well as that C1, the C1 area, and the RVC area. What?
That's Rockies, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
Rockies,
that's
yeah.
Rockies.
This might be, Madam Chair, this might be an odd question or an odd idea. What if we included C1?
Yeah, all the red.
What if we include,
That was my question before. Why wasn't this, sorry.
I think because before we didn't know that we could mandate mixed use, and we didn't want, not that we think Ellen Rosenfeld is going to tear down Roach Brothers and build an apartment building, but you never know what happens if, God forbid, if the property burned down to the ground, she may sell it and move on, or
20 years from now.
Yeah, even
grandkids
20
or-
years. We're building for the long term, that's the
Right,
thing. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, what if we're talking about mandating mixed use, and we are able to establish parking requirements for the residential purpose, and we do something like 3 units, so 3 parking spaces per residential unit, and then I'll have it as shared parking, so we're now making sure there's more parking spaces than just what's going to be necessary for the residents. What would happen if we, I mean, I think if we can include all of it, because they want it downtown, they want this to be, they don't want it too
You know,
far out.
far-flung areas.
If you're
right.
making this in that, all that commercial area,
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking, to just do that whole swath as the opportunity for having mandatory mixed use.
and maybe we can then send that back out in another survey and say, if it's mandatory mixed use, if you know, I mean, theoretically, you could build apartments over Roach Brothers. I don't know if I want to live over a supermarket, but who knows? I mean, you know, Ellen would probably build something really nice. Is that,
We are not scoped to do another engagement survey. We really
Yeah.
need to make a
Okay.
decision. on
I
this.
don't think we need to do another survey. I think we've got the information
well,
back.
we
They
did,
said mixed
and
use.
that was actually,
Yeah.
going back, I mean, if we go
Yeah.
back to one of the earlier slides, wasn't mixed use was like
Yeah,
the
that was the top
that was the
item.
top
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So presumably.
So I think
if
we've
we
listened to the
can-
survey, we've got the
Right,
information.
if we include all of CV2 and CV1, I think that would take a
What about
huge.
RCV?
What
RVC?
about RC and
yeah.
the MCEOD?
This whole thing, everything is highlighted on this map, is what
All
you're
your
saying?
shaded
Yeah.
areas.
You're gonna have the opportunity at town meeting to present it.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if it does get shot down and we get idea, you know, we're hoping to do this early enough so that if it does get shot down, we've still got time to
Yeah.
come back, adjust accordingly and bring
It'll
it
be the
back.
next town meeting, yeah.
No.
So,
But this would allow for reduced density in some of the other areas.
Right.
If we have,
if we
if we
have to
can
do,
include this
if we have
mandatory
to
mixed
do-
use.
if this space isn't enough, then, yeah, we could add other residential
Stony
property, but at a much smaller district, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All
I
right.
think this, Madam Chair, I think that this model and that suggestion really does hit a lot of the priorities we got in feedback from the survey.
Correct.
And could be very workable.
I tend to agree.
Yeah.
Are we in agreement as for
So we're gonna add-
giving John a direction?
So we have a motion being made to go to three parking spaces per unit?
In the mandatory mixed-use district?
Yeah.
So I'm
Can we
making
ask
that
John a
motion.
question?
Go ahead, Owen.
Is there a drawback to doing this much mandatory mixed use? Like, is there a negative that we don't know about?
Well, the only negative is from where I sit are, number one, we can't mandate the parking for commercial. Number two, we don't get the full unit count for that. So it's something like only 20% of your units can be, 20% of your unit count can be mandatory mixed use. So if it gets beyond that, we can't simply make a trade-off and say, well, we're just going to make it all mixed use. Because
Okay.
that's not going to still comply. There has to be 80% of the units have to be outside of a mixed-use district.
All
Okay.
right, then just stick with the highlighted in green, the outlined in green.
Go with the green.
Yeah.
These are those little things that dribble in. Yeah, the highlighted in green is what I would do then. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So you're not gonna have mixed use on GAF?
I'm sorry, and I would do, and it makes sense to consider mixed use, I think, in GAF.
So
Because
the
that's where,
RVC.
RVC, because that's where we're going to have a lot of our development going in that direction. It gives a place for that part of the community to come and support, and it supports that community.
Yeah,
So,
because
yeah,
the tracks are stopping
Yeah.
any migration.
yeah.
So the RVC and CV2
A bridge.
highlighted districts here, we would recommend be used as the mandatory
Right.
mixed-use areas. We in agreement on that?
Those two little green areas right there, too.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
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 With the, all the green areas plus the RVC. Are we in agreement?
Yeah.
Any dissenting? No? All right. So, John, that's kind of our mandate on the mandatory mixed use.
And
Fantastic.
do we like option 3, though, for everything else, pretty much with Stony Brook included, and reducing the pink area as much as possible with what we've just added in? That's
Yeah.
my
Yeah,
suggestion.
take out McCabe Avenue.
Yeah,
And
take
McCabe
out
gone
Stony.
in my mind.
Yeah.
It's in my
We'll
notes.
remove,
So we'll take off everything, and I don't think it makes sense to get rid of McCabe and then have like 2 or 3 parcels right next
Yep.
door. So I think that we would just get rid of everything on the west side of the street here.
Correct.
I would suggest we still include all of this stuff that faces the street, unless you guys say we just want to do these 1, 2, 3, 4 Stony Brook parcels, but I think it makes sense to keep the frontage along here as well. So we're looking at.
It will
kind of
when we
a
just suggested
combination
added it, yeah.
of District of option 1 and option 2, or basically option 2 with the GAF and CLECO sites and the mandatory mixed use, striking all of this stuff over here.
Yeah.
And then I think we're also in agreement to try and reduce District 1 as much as possible, yes? How do we feel about that?
Sorry.
District 1, do we want to shrink that pink, or do we want to keep it the same size?
Let's run the number, my recommendation would be to run the numbers with keeping it as it is,
Yeah.
If
on the
it's-
pink.
On the pink, right.
But on the yellow, getting rid of the west side of
Pleasant Street.
Plain.
Plain Street, yeah.
And then we're looking at those smaller parcels that are along 109 that are in yellow. Should those be in or should those be removed?
The ones that are, I forget that Horseshoe Street right there, those little ones.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, that should be.
yeah,
These guys.
right.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
small-
And
Yeah.
I forget the name of that
Quarter acre
street.
I'd leave those in for right now and just round out that corner, I think. I don't
You
know.
mean take out this section
No,
right there?
I'd leave those in.
Yeah.
I think they're much like the lots behind in blue also, smaller lots and,
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
yeah, they're all tiny lots.
yeah.
is that Hilltop?
I can't
Yes,
read it.
that's what it is.
Is that Hilltop, or is it?
It's Hilltop.
Yeah,
It has an old curve to it.
Let's see what numbers we come up with by losing the west side of Plain Street, including JF
As mixed use.
as mixed use and in Hope as mixed use. You know, what we talked about with the mixed use.
Yes.
with the
And
three
then-
mandated parking spaces. I mean, I'd like to reduce that.
And then,
Pink
and
and
putting
green as much
a
as
requirement for the mixed use, a certain higher number of residential parking spots.
Do you want, Wayne, do you want a copy?
Problem is, those aren't labeled.
Can we
Flip
take a look
between
at
maps.
Wayne's?
Yes, Wayne,
Yeah.
do you want to look?
Madeline has a printout of it. Oh, I do too.
All right, so we,
Somewhere.
on the table right now is looking at option 3, which is up on the screen. Oh, that's option 2. There we go, option 3.
Yeah.
But removing west side of Plain Street, but otherwise, well, and removing the parcels that were part of that mandatory mixed-use area that we just discussed. Are we in agreement to move forward in modeling that as our potential recommendation?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
All right, so that's a full yes from the committee on that. Does that make sense, John?
Yes, and I'm going to go ahead and repeat all that back just
Yeah,
so
please.
we're in agreement.
Thank you.
So we're going to be having mixed use in the RBC and CV2 districts.
Yes.
Yes.
So these pink salmon colored districts, in addition to the other parcels that are just across the street there, pushing up against the MCEOD.
Yep.
We are going to remove McCabe Avenue and everything on the west side of Plain Street here,
Yes,
and keep the rest of it as is,
yes.
Yes.
right?
Yes,
We are going to change the mandatory mixed-use areas to 3 parking spaces per dwelling unit.
yes.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And lastly, when you come back to us, can you talk about the cap, maximum units per district, you know, the maximum number cap? I want to end up
Yes.
closer to 750 than 1,700,
Yeah.
okay?
Absolutely. So, you know, and this is something I think we could get a little direction on from you guys right now. Do we want to try to just get that cap down to a reasonable amount?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't, I mean, I'm not resigned, I've gotten my head around 750 over the next X number of years, not in a week, but
Yeah.
in the next 20 years or something. But I couldn't get to 1,700, which is kind of where I worked my numbers up. So get to a required number, close to it, approximate it, you know, get to what will meet the requirement, but let's not knock it out of the park. We're only a town of what,
Right.
3,500 homes or so.
It's just
you
not
know?
going to be palatable to be
Right.
Yeah.
far beyond
Right.
that 750.
No, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah, if the state minimum is 750, anything over 751, it's going to be an argument,
right, right.
and reasonably so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
know.
So,
Okay, so the other thing that we can't really give a full answer on here, and we probably won't be able to until we're able to see the new modeling tools from EOHLC, is the other variable that really seems to impact what that gross density looks like. And reminder, we have to have a gross density of 15 units per acre or more. And to get that, that means we may need to bump this number up just a little bit. So we're going to bump that up and keep it as low as we possibly can. But it could very
Units per
well
lot.
hit a maximum number of something like 20 units per acre. If that's the case, do we have any concerns on your guys' end, or something that we need to kind of just flag and stop and say there's no way we can't hit these numbers unless we do something that could be a little bit too much?
Yeah.
So really, what this means is we're going to plug all these numbers into the model when we're able to
That's
finally,
a lot.
finalize it and get to that point.
Yeah.
And we want to keep this number as low as possible. Is
Yes.
there
Yeah,
any
keep-
concern with how high this could go? And I don't think we're going to hit anything, I don't think it's going to double. We're not going to see 30 or anything like that. But is there anything that would give anybody on this committee a little bit of pause if it got too high?
Even if it got to 20, I think we might.
yeah, I think when it hits 20, we start to
Okay,
go,
so-
have a pause, yeah.
So we'll keep going through the work, and if we realize that we can't do it with more than 20 units per acre, we'll come back and have another conversation with it. But otherwise, I think we'll be in good shape to get a bylaw written.
Yeah, and we added a large parcel there, and we put Ann and Hope back into that district, so hopefully that helps us, even though it is mixed use.
Yep.
And quite honestly, if there's any place you can go higher than 3 stories, it would be that Ann and Hope parcel, I would think, as mixed use. But let's hold that till the end,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we
Yeah.
have to go,
A point to consider, just for visual aspect, if you go to Medway, the new
Yeah.
units they built on the left, if you take that there, that's 15 per acre, and times it by 4. That's what you're talking about building.
Yeah, but
take
not,
that
not
development
those
times 4.
giant.
Just so you have an idea
Yeah.
of volume. That's why the chief's got a new hook and ladder.
Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah.
Chief, how high does the ladder go?
Okay, let's save on that.
Well, that's me,
Let's
that's
not-
the reason why you consider how high you build,
Yeah, that is,
Well, yeah.
absolutely.
That's true.
Why Mr. Klocko told me never to stay above the 5th floor in a hotel.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking. Other than the fact that I'm interested in, the chief's new toys, but.
Yeah. All right. So have we haven't talked about affordability.
Yeah, affordability is the next part, and like I said, based on how things looked in the survey, people were kind of, they were split. They didn't really have a direction one way or another.
Yeah.
So I think the question is, do we want to hit the greatest percentage of affordable units that we can get to, which is 20%? And
Yes.
if we want to achieve maximum affordability here, does the committee have any thoughts on if we would rather have more units that are mildly affordable or fewer units that are more deeply affordable? And I'm not going to take a stance as to if there's a right or wrong answer here. There's different trade-offs for both. And I just wanted to hear everybody's thoughts on what we all think.
Well, my personal view is I'd rather have more units that are moderately affordable than fewer that are deeply affordable.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we're looking at options right now with state subsidized housing to expand that for the ones that are in deepest financial need.
Right.
And that's tough to get traction on, from a private developer. But when it's the moderately affordable, at least there's a chance of
And
getting it done.
that's the largest gap in Massachusetts right now, is the moderately affordable.
Correct.
You have $1 million homes, and there are other programs for
Yeah.
deeply affordable. But it's that middle of the road, which is more than half of the residents of Massachusetts,
Yeah.
that they can't find homes, so.
And that's where we can make the biggest impact.
And I think that can drive a positive vote for this, is if
Yes.
it's something that's affordable.
Yep.
I think we're going to have a hard time selling that at the town meeting, which is, what we're going to say to the folks is, 40B housing is 10%, and we're going to double it. It's not going to sell. You won't get it through town meeting. You'll get 10% through, because that's what the 40B is now.
If we have more affordable units by allowing the 20%, that allows us to move that 40B deficit that we have in town, the affordability deficit. And so we have a chance of meeting those targets so we can control the 40B developments if we can do the 20% affordability on these new developments.
Right. It does help us. It would be more helpful if the selectmen would go into an agreement to control the 40Bs, as Medfield did. But that's a political football thing. So I just don't think you can sell the 20%. I don't think it's sellable.
I don't know, when we got the responses back on affordability, there is a certain amount of desire for
I guess
more
my question is,
affordable
what do you mean
housing.
by 20%? If we're saying we're gonna make 20% of it affordable,
Correct.
right?
Moderately affordable.
Moderately affordable.
That should be more appealing to residents who are saying we need more affordable housing. By
Yeah,
this.
that's exactly my view. And when we prepare our, we're calling them the show your support materials, so all the things that we're going to be putting together that will empower all of you to have these conversations and town meetings and things like that. We can include those income thresholds, because all these affordability numbers come from HUD. And HUD says if you have a family of 4, you qualify for affordable housing if you're at 80% of the area median income for a family of 4. And that's likely going to be a number that resonates with a lot of people. So I think it's going to be a little bit more understandable to see how everything kind of fits into the big picture once people realize kind of where they fit into all of it. And right now it's a little conceptual and it's a little bit hard to get there. So I think we've heard a lot of overwhelming support for it. It's our position at MAPC that the 20% makes a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense for a community like this where we're seeing a lot of housing struggles and a lot of support for additional affordable housing. And I think that would make sense as far as how to move forward. So it's our recommendation based on what we've heard from you all tonight that you said you'd rather have more units that are moderately more units that are moderately affordable as opposed to fewer units that are deeply affordable, because that will impact how we can do these calculations and do these things that make sure that it's not going to be a detriment for development, because that's really the spirit of this requirement, is making sure that communities don't say, well, it all has to be 100% affordable to 30% AMI, because then, of course, no developer is going to bite at that.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So we got to make sure that it works, and we got to make sure that it works numbers-wise. And I think that we could tell our person in our office who's doing all this modeling work, if we could hit 20% affordable for 80% AMI, I think that kind of hits what all of you are speaking to, and that hits our maximum affordability threshold. It is greater than 40B, however, it will create a bigger dent in the SHI if we're able to do things like this, which will keep 40B developments at bay. It's going to have a little bit more direction from the town as to where developments would likely to be built. So we're hopefully not seeing more 40Bs come through that are going to be impacting other neighborhoods away from the town center and things like that.
Correct.
So that's how we're approaching this here. Does anybody have any opposition to modeling this at 20% affordable for 80% AMI and seeing if that can work?
I say go ahead.
I'm the only dissenting.
Why do you think it would not pass a town
I
meeting?
don't think it'll pass.
Oh, what's the reason that people might have?
I think they're gonna say enough is enough, and, you're forcing this down our throat to begin with. I call Central Committee thinking, CCP, it's done all the time, and that's what they're doing. They're forcing it down, whether, the character of our town is gonna change, not in my lifetime, but in your lifetime it is. And you're telling the people, look, we're gonna make this group here, we're gonna give it 20%. So 80 of the people, I just don't think it's gonna.
Well, that group there is my kid who works as a teacher in Brookline who qualifies at 80% of the AMI.
But we're not making 80% of the town, we're not making 20% of the town,
Yeah.
we're making 20% of the development.
Maybe
Yeah.
are the folks who qualify for the inclusionary zoning that we're talking about, do they get subsidized? Is their rent subsidized by the state the same way as a 40B tenants would be?
This rent would be subsidized by the development and by the developer. So
Right.
nobody's going to be getting checks from the government. We're not talking
Right,
explicitly about Section 8 or anything like that. We're
Right.
saying that rents would be capped for folks who are making 80% of the AMI to not pay more than 1/3 of their rent to rent those units. And those would go into the state lottery system and things like that.
Okay, so they would be guaranteed not to pay more than 30% of their income towards their rent and living expenses.
Yeah, and it's calculated based on gross income, which you can have your own opinions as to whether or not that's fair. I'm not going to take that today, but that means they're looking at your income before they take taxes out and saying you will pay no more than 1/3 of that number, and then of course it starts creeping up towards 50% for a lot of folks very quickly once the folks in Boston take their cut and the folks in Washington take their cut.
Yep.
Steve Smith, just a quick
gotta
one.
come
We're
to the
not
mic.
talking about all rental, right? We're talking, you can sell condo, 15 units, 3 have to be affordable.
Right.
Period, whether you rent and or sell.
Good point, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Zoning cannot mandate rental and purchase, so we can't have anything that's just designated as, we're going to have a part of town where all the renters are going to be or anything like that. We
Okay.
can't do things like that.
Yep.
But that's a good question.
Yeah.
Okay, the only other thing that I wanted to kind of touch on while we're here having this conversation is when we look at this mixed-use district requirement, do we want to do anything to incentivize anything here, or do we not want to have that conversation as part of this?
Incentivized to what?
What are our options?
I mean, the options are kind of whatever we would like them to be. So, if we wanted to have something else put into the zoning that says, if you do something for the town, for instance, if you add if there's a public space requirement and you can say, if you set aside X amount of the development for public space and you're over a certain number of acres, we'll let you build 5 stories and more units instead of 3 stories or something like that. Or is that a conversation we just don't want to have?
I don't think I want to have it yet. I mean, it might be when you come back and tell me I have to go to 21 units per acre, I might say, maybe 4 stories in that
Yeah,
zone
exactly.
is okay. But,
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's completely fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll put a cap on that right now. Maybe we'll need to amend our draft bylaw when we get there. Okay, so our next steps moving forward, we're going to put we're going to get these boundaries mapped. We're going to put them into the model. We're going to see if they work. I'm feeling really confident that we'll be in good shape. We're going to hopefully have a draft bylaw to discuss sometime in December. We'll see how all that works with the holiday stuff. That may end up being in January. We're going to have our affordability recommendations brought back to you all, and we'll have our person model it and see how they look. And we're going to start working on all of our show your support materials. So we are here. We're in November. Our October meeting got pushed back. That means our December meeting may get pushed back, but that's okay. We're going to get this stuff figured out and finished and drafted. We're going to figure out a time with Bob to have a meeting with you all, a meeting with the planning board, and to see what we can do to get this moved forward for town meeting. Our timeline has, gotten adjusted as we've had lots of other conversations and lots of other things going on, but I feel like we're in a good spot right now, and I really just want to thank everybody on this committee for all your thoughtful questions, all the things that we've gone through to get to this point. I know that there's still been lots of contention and lots of things to kind of work through, but I think it speaks volumes to the kinds of things that you all are doing in Millis, the way that you are approaching this from a really pragmatic standpoint, which really helps all of us as we're trying to do this work. And I think that we really hit all of our goals for tonight, which is what we needed to do. So thank you to you all, and thank you to everybody who cares so much about your town and your neighborhoods and your street to show up and have that conversation with us tonight as well. We really appreciate you all being here.
Yep. Thank you, John. Thanks to your team for all your work on this. And, I'm really glad with the amount of decisions that we were able to make tonight. Your slides hugely helpful to get us to that point, so we definitely appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, I think we can let John go, and we'll just do the approval of our minutes.
I'll make
and-
a motion to approve the minutes of
Thank you,
8:21.
John.
Second. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, John. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of 8:21 as written. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So moved, and can you send out start drafting a potential next meeting date?
I put out a poll,
Yep.
an informal poll,
Well,
for
there's-
us, or they may
need to
send,
wait to know when they're done.
That's
Yeah.
true,
Yeah.
yep,
So-
yep.
and actually, MAPC may send out the poll.
Okay, yep, so we'll do that. All right.
Wayne, I'll call.
24th?
Yeah, yeah, no one's got anything going on
It's a
then.
great time to have a ZBA meeting.
Yeah.
Valentine's Day was a finance
On a
committee
Sunday?
meeting that always won. All right.
Take a
I'll make a
motion?
motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
North
Thank
Greensboro
you,
had that one
everyone.
till
We are
midnight.
adjourned.
All right.